Anna Ruday. I'm with the Sacramento Community Grange, and we're very blessed tonight to have Peter Mathews here, an author of Dollar Democracy. And the Grange is a fraternal organization. California State Grange was established in 1870, so it's been around a long time. It's a group of communities and small agriculture and sustainable ag, and we help each other. We have youth programs, we have farming instruction programs, and we're very interested in Peter's work, particularly because he focuses on corporate control of public policy. And agriculture is facing that issue with industrial farming and trying to diminish the importance of sustainable ag and community ag, and protecting food security and seed freedom and issues like that. So Peter's work is getting noticed, and by the look of the group here tonight, there are other people interested as well. So thank you so much for coming. And this tonight is sponsored by the CSG United is our name now. We recently changed our name to CSG United, and also Move to Amend.
Thank you. Move to Amend is a local organization promoting two changes to the Constitution. One which says money is not speech, so we can regulate political campaign money, and the other says that corporations are not people, so we can actually have people in charge rather than large multinational corporations. Our speaker tonight is Peter Mathews. He spent 30 years as a college and university professor and is now employed as a full-time political science professor at Cypress College. Among his many other activities, he's also a featured political analyst and contributing partner on the Head On radio show on KEIB-AM in Los Angeles. And he was himself the Democratic Party nominee for the United States Congress in 1998 and ran a close race in the Long Beach, California-based congressional district. He's the author of the book Dollar Democracy, which you see over here, and will be around to autograph it after the presentation. I'd also remind you all that we do have materials for Move to Amend and Sacramento Community Grange at the back. Please take some, sign up. You can get plugged into local political activity that way. And now would you join me in welcoming Peter Mathews?
Peter.
Well, I think the seeds of the quest for justice were sown by my parents. My dad and mom were both social workers, and Dad was a psychologist, Mom was a special ed teacher, but they did a lot of social work in helping those who had less than the rest of us. And I saw that example, and I think it came in, it became part of me, that the reason for living, I think, is to serve the human family. And we all belong to the same family, no matter what we believe, no matter what we look like, and that was really how my parents treated other people. And I saw it, and I think that had a big impact. But the seminal event was when I went to Berlin in my junior year of college, and I saw this in 1972. I saw this massive wall dividing the same people, the German people, a wall wider than this building. And I said, I've read about this in books, but this is incredible. And the feeling you got at that time was amazing because the Cold War was on, I crossed over to East Berlin. I got a chance to hang out and talk to the people there because Fidel Castro was on tour at that time. What fortune, I can't believe it. There were thousands of people waiting for Castro to come by his motorcade. I was able to meet these folks, have a few glasses of, what should I say, vodka or beer? I can't believe the pastor. I had a few drinks with him. Okay, it's okay. God's forgiven me, right? Just a few. And so while we're talking and having a good time, and I was able to get to find out what their lives were like. And the main question I had was, how do you folks feel about living here? And to find out exactly what the people on the other side of the wall were living like compared to the ones on the West Berlin side where I was living and staying. And it was like night and day. There were a lot of positive things about their society, which they told me about, universal health care, tuition-free education, a chance to make something of their technical lives, but what they missed was the freedom of conscience, the freedom to worship the way they wanted to, or worship, or even have political views the way they wanted to. And so I saw this wall dividing the same people, and I had a quest there in my heart to find out what is it that causes these walls to rise between us? So many people in the world, between men and women, between rich and poor, between those who are undocumented and those who are in a country that's secure. So my quest became how to bring those walls down and to create social justice. I think it started with my parents, though, and their values. It's a pleasure and an honor being here with such a great audience of all kinds of folks who are from different walks of life and different communities. But I want to thank the CSG and, of course, Move to Amend, and Jan Ellen Ryan and Diana Ruday and others who are involved in both groups to put this together to me, because I think this is the main way we're going to change the world. And we have to change this world because it's not going the right way, in my view, and many of you would agree, I think. I want to talk about income inequity for a second. The numbers are staggering, as you probably know. The income gap between the average CEO and the average worker in America in 1980, before Reagan came in, the income gap, the ratio, was 40 to 1. 40 to 1. It is today almost 400 to 1. The top 1% of this country has captured 93% of the new income since 2009. That's a UC Berkeley study. So all of these indicators of income gaps, I mean, not to mention our children. 1/5 of our children in America go hungry to bed sometime during the month in a country that produces food for the world. That is just outrageous to me. And this gap is, like you said, it's just unconscionable. And if the American people knew it, they'll say these robber barons at the very top have to do something about it. They're going to go by the way as they did back in the 1890s. We got rid of them, basically, their power, by having reforms, the progressive movement. So yes, the progressive movement was a people's movement, the populist movement was, and we can start a 21st century populist people's movement that can pressure the society to take note of these inequities. And then you've got to ultimately pressure the political leadership, the system itself, because policy gets made by laws being passed generally. And to do that, we've got to have a higher level of consciousness among American people as to what's wrong and how we can fix it. And then you've got to go eventually through massive protests and rallies, peacefully always, out on the street, out on the sidewalks, at campuses, in town halls, as well as connect hands on the street with hands in the government. We're sitting in our capital right here, Sacramento, right? And some of the stuff I can tell you about there, I'll be afraid if I leave Sacramento if I say that, but one of the things that happened, as you know, a year ago or two, at the end of the legislative session, we had a Maui Mai Tai party between the lobbyists and some of the top legislators here. Did you hear about that? LA Times had it on the front page. These guys, this is a foundation, a charitable foundation set up by the pharmaceutical companies, the oil companies, and the prison guards union, and a few other corporate special interests. They raised so much money, put it in this foundation, and they invited leaders of our legislature to go to Maui, Hawaii for 1 week for a working vacation on the beach, drinking and sipping Mai Tais, all paid for by those lobbyists. And you know what the legislators had to pay for? Their airline ticket only. So what do? They took their campaign contributions here and paid for their airline ticket. I am not making this up. Where's the American people's Mai Tai party with the legislators? So this has got, you're right, this has to be a higher consciousness raising and then a demand, as Frederick Douglass said. We got to go up there and demand from them. Imagine we had 1 million people on the Capitol steps on a given day saying, you better do this because we are going to vote you out next time. They're going to pay attention. 10,000 won't do it. Maybe 20, 30,000 would do it. I call it an inside-outside strategy that is working, as many of our top leaders did, to lead these social movements in America. The best and most comprehensive change that were brought in America was through social movements, people's movements. Am I right? From the anti-slavery movement, the abolitionist movement, civil rights movement, the labor movement, the environmental movement, the women's equity and equality movement, the LGBT movement, the people with disabilities movement. It was all started on the ground, and it went to the top by us demanding it. Am I right? And then the leaders had to follow. That's why I love what Gandhi once said. You can quote him on this, write it down. When the people lead, the leaders will follow. When the people lead, the leaders will follow. What do you think about that, sir? So that's what has to be done, and you're talking about that type of movement. But ultimately, who's got to make the policies and the laws to change the structure of our society, our economy, and our government? It's the elected leaders. And I go back to what the scriptures say in Proverbs 29:18, where there is no vision, the people perish. Am I right? Where there is no vision, the people perish. And we know this from our history, from our philosophy, from our spiritual studies, that there were people like Dr. Martin Luther King. He had the vision. He had the vision that every human being belongs in this earth as with dignity. That we have to treat each other the way we are in terms of our character, not the color of our skin. But the vision went beyond that. When Dr. King was brutally assassinated, he was really fighting for economic justice. Am I right? Yes. Of course he was fighting much of his life for racial justice, but economic justice to bring up an opportunity for those who were the sanitation workers of Memphis, who were paid next to nothing, whose lives were in danger every day. And Dr. King's vision, we've actually, I think, in my view, lost a lot of that in this country today. We've lost the vision of Franklin Roosevelt, our FDR president, who was the president during the Great Depression, who said that we have nothing to fear but fear itself, and also economic Bill of Rights. President Roosevelt talked, and he brought in, he actually wrote up an economic bill of rights which says the right to a good paying job. There's Dr. King's vision coming back, or vice versa. Because without a job, you don't have dignity. You don't have enough income to be able to fulfill your full human potential, your God-given potential. So Dr. King, Franklin Roosevelt's vision was right there about the right to a high-paying job for people, a well-paying job, so they can live a fully human life and fulfill their full human potential and pass it on to their children. In our Constitution, it says we the people are establishing this Constitution in the preamble in order to do many things. To promote the general welfare and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That's the next generation. Or as Chief Seattle would say, the next 7 generations. Am I right, ladies and gentlemen? Mm-hmm. Haven't we forgotten that or gotten away from it because of corporate greed? There you go. Let's call it like it is. That's why I love Move to Amend and what you're doing and have been doing. And I've been spokesperson for you in Southern California. I've spoken for Move to Amend and the 28th We the People Amendment, because this amendment, when it's adopted, and it's going to be adopted, believe me, it will remove corporate personhood. It'll say corporations are not people. To me, that's a spiritual accomplishment, because there's nothing in the spiritual books that says corporations are people. They have no soul. They have no emotions. They have no way to love people. They can't get married. And what were these Supreme Court justices thinking? What were they smoking when they decided in 1886, in the Southern California Railroad versus Santa Clara County, in that court decision, the Supreme Court decided unanimously that corporations are natural persons, with the protection of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the 14th Amendment, which was the most egregious, because that 14th Amendment was there to ensure that former slaves would be given full personhood, and not given, but given back their full personhood after fighting for it. And this amendment was, I don't want to use bad words, it's not church, is it? But it was terribly interpreted for the court, saying that these corporations are just like human beings. And instead, they gave them the right to do whatever they want with that corporate personhood. And the 20th Amendment says money is not going to be speech anymore, because in 1976, in the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, the Supreme Court decided that money is equal to speech, and therefore it cannot be regulated much at all in any kind of election, and it just blew the lid off of any kind of possible campaign finance reform. On top of that, in 2010, this Supreme Court that's sitting there right now decides on Citizens United that any large organization, a corporation or labor unions, but mostly corporations, can raise as much money as they want and spend it on behalf of a candidate, as long as the money does not go through the candidate's treasury. But that's a big joke. Look at just what happened with the super PAC with Jeb Bush. He helped to raise $100 million for a super PAC, which was based on Citizens United. And when they asked him, Mr. Bush, aren't you a candidate? You should not be coordinating with the super PAC. That's against that Citizens United ruling. You're supposed to be separate from the PAC. They can spend money on your behalf, but you shouldn't be raising money for them. And you know what he said? I'm not a candidate for president yet. This is so egregious because we're going against the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and I think he violated the law. So this is wrong, and this is going outrageously out of control, and that's why Move to Amend's amendment is extremely important, that we all get aboard. I think Move to Amend now has close to 400,000 signatures of people who support it, and we're going to keep pushing that until it's already been introduced each year in the House. If we get 2/3 of the House to vote for it and 2/3 of the Senate, it becomes a formally proposed amendment, right? And then it goes to the state legislatures to be ratified by 38 states, 2/3. And that can be done. And Move to Amend is working on getting pledges from state legislators to say if it comes to their desk, when it gets proposed formally, they will ratify it. And that's so wonderful. That's why Move to Amend is really, really an important organization, folks. It's made up of those hundreds of thousands of Americans as well as hundreds of organizations. And of course, CSG is part of that. I mean, the Grange and now the CSG has been an active part of it. And every one of these major issues is connected by money and politics, as you know. And my book, Dollar Democracy, with Liberty and Justice for Some, How to Reclaim the American Dream for All, is the book about how this egregious conditioning of money in our political system that is bought and paid for our legislators is what has ruined America in so many areas. Each chapter is a topic, a public policy area. I deal with the actual buying of elections. I deal with educational injustice, environmental injustice, food injustice, and don't forget the injustice of having to have schools that are so decrepit that students don't even have updated textbooks, so they have class sizes that are too large. And not only that, you've got all kinds of other things. You have big agribusiness so concentrated, where 85% of the meatpacking industry is controlled by 4 beef packing corporations. 4! In every other area of our economy, the 4 top corporations control about 45% of the industry. That's still bad enough, right? But if you go to meat packing, pork processing, chicken processing, it's between 60 and 80 or 90% of the market is controlled. And this kind of monopoly is what's ruined, causing us to have food that is poisonous. GMOs, genetically modified organisms, which are totally against not only nature, but against biology and against our digestive systems. And we know what it does. My book describes specifically how the actual process of genetic modification takes place, with shooting genes through a gene gun into the DNA of a cell. And it creates a completely 2 to 4% different nature of the cell compared to its parent cell. And then on top of that, the protein expression of that cell changes by 5%. So you got all kinds of poisons in our body because of GMOs. And it's because the big corporations such as Monsanto and Cargill and all the others who defeated Prop 37, that was our labeling bill, which I support. I work with Pam Larry on it here. It is so important. I have a 4-year-old daughter, ladies and gentlemen. She's almost 4. I keep thinking she's 4. She acts like she's 5. She's an amazing little girl. Her name is Paige Amara Mathews. We named her Paige for literary value because my wife, Latoya Baker, is a writer. And I also have something to do with education, right? So I teach. But our little Paige Amara Mathews is 3.5. And we try to shop at organic places as much, at least once a week. But look at the other, and we can't do it always because then sometimes we're in a rush to get somewhere. We have to stop by and buy her something in a restaurant because of what's going on. So we try to get her the bean burritos. It's a little business, a small business that I think is fairly healthy, but we don't dare put chicken in there because that could have hormones, right? So this is the thing. We got to think about all of this, and yet as much as we try, when these corporations don't care about human life, all they care about is their bottom line, then little Paige is going to suffer. Paige, no matter how much Paige's parents want to protect her from GMOs, it's going to be virtually impossible in our society. Am I right or wrong? Right. So the thing to do is to get labeling through, to get that and stop the Dark Act. The Dark Act, bought by these Monsanto and big agribusiness, has been passed through the House of Representatives, as you know, but it's going on in the Senate, and we hope to block it there. That Dark Act would stop any state from being able to label GMO foods or other kinds of foods, which are so bad for our health. And that is a complete suppression of freedom of choice in America. It's against the American way of freedom. And these are the issues that I talk about in my book. And in the chapter on Wall Street, I talk about the Wall Street crash in 2008, the predatory lending that went on. I talk about these certificates of deposit, CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, which are highly sophisticated, totally egregious financial instruments that the Wall Street banks put on there to make a lot of money quickly and didn't care about the homeowners. And that happened because GlassSteagall was taken out, because President Clinton and about a third of the Democrats in Congress and about all the Republicans voted to remove GlassSteagall, the act that worked so well, brought in the Great Depression era by President Roosevelt and Congress. They passed the GlassSteagall Act to separate commercial banking from investment banking. A common sense thing to do. You know, commercial banking is where most of us keep our small paychecks and things and our savings, and investment banking is where the big guys have huge amounts of money to speculate and play around on Wall Street and go out and do futures contracts and all that kind of stuff, which could come crashing down. They want to make money big quickly, and they don't mind losing it because they have lots more, right? So President Roosevelt said, no, you can't do this anymore because you brought down the stock market in '29 and you crashed it. You won't do it again. So for 63 years, I think it is, from 1933 to 1999, we had GlassSteagall in place, and it was working. There was never a Great Recession during that time. There was no Great Depression for 63 years. And after all the lobbying of money and politics, of the big banks going and paying these congressmen to get elected, to help them get elected, putting them in the Congress, both parties, and then giving President Clinton, candidate Clinton, lots of money as well. What does Clinton do, along with this Republican guy who's always corporate? What is his name? No, the guy from Texas, the senator, his wife, Wendy Graham, Phil Graham and Clinton, Republican and Democrat, got together and did the bidding of these corporate lobbyists to remove GlassSteagall. And Phil Graham's wife, Wendy, was an economist, was pushing this thing through intellectually, coming up with theories of how this will work. It's just it had to do with the money chasing these members of Congress and the foundations that fund people like Wendy Graham and the universities that are taking money from these corporations. That's why you have to have move to amends 28th, We the People Amendment. So this is the kind of thing I talk about in my book. And I would hope the book brings some illumination, but I cannot leave one topic. And I'm not going to talk forever tonight, I promise you. I'm not a politician.
Oh, you're doing fine.
Am I okay? Yeah. You don't mind hearing what I'm saying? Yeah. Thank you. This chapter is extremely important. It's chapter 8 in the book, which is a new chapter in this edition. It's the second edition. The first edition came out a year earlier. And since I was here, the second edition's out now. And this chapter 8 is a very important chapter. It's called Pentagon Waste, Fraud, and Abuse. And it goes into the military-industrial-congressional complex and how they came about. And I even quote President Eisenhower when he described it back in the 50s as being, he warned us against the unwarranted influence of the military-industrial complex. When he first wrote the speech in the draft copy, I found out that President Eisenhower didn't call it just the military-industrial complex. He called it the military-industrial-congressional complex. And I've called it that again. I brought that name back because that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's not just the military and the industries like Lockheed that are doing this. It's members of Congress that the enablers. They're the ones who vote for this and take campaign contributions from Lockheed Martin to build the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which, by the way, Rand Corporation said this F-35 Joint Strike Fighter cannot turn, it can't climb, and it can't fly. If an airplane can't do that, what's it supposed to do? Here's an example of this Joint Strike Fighter. It was contracted by Lockheed Martin with the US government, the Pentagon, to be built 20 years ago for a price of $67 million. Put that number down in your mind. $67 million per plane, okay? When this Joint Strike Fighter came into production, was put on, ready to be used by the government, to be bought by government, 10 years late, by the way, it had all these problems. The engines were catching on fire. It had all major, numerous problems. It was grounded several times. Finally, it was bought by the government and used. This Joint Strike Fighter, 10 years late in production, arrival, cost the government an average of $200 million a plane. From $67 million to $200 million. And by the way, the contracts are written that way. And Congress is the one who signs those, votes for the money for it. And they sign it with the Pentagon. The contract says in small type, cost plus overruns. That means if Lockheed had said we'll do it for $67 million, the government says we'll sign off on it. And in the very fine print it says, but there's also going to be cost plus overruns. In case Lockheed comes back 10 years later, how about that money? We're going to charge you $200 million and you got to pay, and the government pays. And I've got actual numbers, dollar amounts that members of Congress took from Lockheed Martin and the committees that they sit on that pushed the F-35 through, when even some of the generals and admirals said, we don't need this airplane. We could use the F-16, the F-18, which are good fighters and bombers. They do separate things. Good fighters and bombers, is that a contradiction or what? We shouldn't be killing anyone. We should be using diplomacy and negotiating. But the thing is, even if you're talking their language, these bombers do different things, and they try to put all of it into one airplane. That's why it's such a disaster. So even though some of the leaders of the actual military said we don't need this, the lobbyists pushed Congress, and the Congress has an F-35 caucus. What do you think about that? They actually have 36 members of Congress. I can list their names, by the way, and the dollars they got from Lockheed Martin and others. I've exposed a lot of stuff, a lot of people. So I hope you're ready for this. I'm waiting for the, you know what, to hit the fan, which I'm looking forward to. But this F-35 caucus, you know what caucuses in Congress are set up for? To promote some kind of public interest that's good for everyone, that people like to specialize in, right? And yet, this F-35 caucus, the only interest they have is getting more and more money to Lockheed Martin to build more and more of these planes that we don't need. They're totally wasteful, and it's just unbelievable. So that's what this book is about, and I like to connect that with philosophical and spiritual principles. This is not just about money and about the wrong airplanes. This is about who we are as human beings. What are we as a country? What is this country's soul? The Bible says, what doth it profit a man if he should gain the whole world but lose his own? His own soul. And I ask, what does it profit a nation if we gain the whole world and lose our own soul? Think about that. We have 1,000 military bases around the world, ladies and gentlemen. We're the only country even close to that. All countries don't have any. There may be one country, Russia or China, that has one base, neighboring country. There are no 1,000 bases that any other country has. And these 1,000 American U.S. military bases are in 150 nations of the world out of 195 nations. So you look at our extensive reach, and it's not us. I believe this military presence is there primarily to promote corporate greed, to make sure that our big companies can invest in cheap labor markets and pay those Indonesian workers, as Nike does, 20 cents an hour, mostly women, and that's another thing. Women and men are so unequal still today in America, and that has to be fought for, and that's because of dollar democracy. That's why it's like that. But look at the Indonesian women. Nike shut those factories down in Oregon, which were paying union jobs, and they took that factory to Indonesia and make those shoes that sell for $200 a piece for 20 cents an hour for those women who are in dire poverty. And let me tell you something. Nike got a corporate subsidy. The U.S. government, according to our law, is allowed to pay for Nike's moving expenses. You realize that? That's the corporate kind of loopholes I'm talking about. The last page of my book has a list of 40 corporations. I can leave them off to you in a minute. 40 corporations that paid, and that's only a few out of many, many more, that paid zero income tax in 2012 while making hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in profit. And I'll give you one example. Facebook made $1.062 billion in profit in 2012 and paid zero income tax legally because of what's called the stock option loophole. They wrote off all their income as being stock options, so no tax on it. And not only that, but Facebook received $429 million from the US government, your money and mine, in what's called corporate welfare, because Facebook could use that money to promote its products around the world. And the government did it for so many other companies. And it has to do with dollar democracy, and it has to do with corporate personhood. And it's time, many of you know, because many of you will move to amend, that corporations originally started out at the state level back in the early 1800s in Massachusetts to build a turnpike. The state government contracted a corporation to build a turnpike. Then it allowed in the contract the charter, which it gave a temporary charter to the state, to that company to build the canal. There's a canal. They gave them a temporary charter to build a canal, and then in the charter it said, you can build a canal, and whatever it costs you, you can recover the cost, Mr. Corporation, by charging tolls on that canal. And once you recover your building cost, you can have 12% more profit, and after that, your charter expires completely. It's gone. You got to come back and renegotiate, ask us for a new charter to do some other project. It goes away automatically. We've come from that to this today, where corporations are considered people. I mean, it's just totally outrageous. And my book explodes that myth about corporations being people. Instead, it says that we, the people, have to bring back our democracy. And we can do it. We can work together. We can change this world. And I believe what Frederick Douglass, one of my heroes, also said once, the great abolitionist, is, former slave. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. Power concedes nothing without a demand. So those in power will generally not give up any of their power unless we, the people, demand it and show them the morality of it, and then they can't fight it. It happened with Dr. King, it happened with Mahatma Gandhi, with Cesar Chavez, Susan B. Anthony, Harriet Tubman. Every one of those folks demanded change, and that's the only time it happened. So that's what this book is about, demanding change, and we, the people, will do it. I cannot believe this place is packed. It's so wonderful to see everyone here. I love you all. And let's stop right now so you can ask me questions. I can go on and on about the book otherwise. We're getting a good discussion on this stuff. Thank you.
I'd like to say right now, Dr. Jackson, would you come up? Just some of the people I invited. Bishop Ron Allen. I've got Franklin Van Dyke coming in the door there. My pastor, Pastor Jefferson, okay? And these folks are in our group, if they want to be in your group, okay?
I only have a couple questions to ask Mr. Mathews. I study politics a lot. It's like my new life now since I'm retired. And my question is, given the ruling on Citizens United by the Supreme Court, why do you feel that they failed to be able to elect Mitt Romney in 2012? What do you think?
Great question. Wonderful question. I'm pretty sure I know what happened. I studied it very carefully. And I think it has to do with this country. In the presidential elections, we have a high turnout, much higher turnout. In midterms, much lower. And we know the folks that stay home during midterms, but in presidential elections, these folks come to work, to vote. And they're the young people,
Right.
many people of color,
Right.
lower income people, and those are naturally Democrats. And not only that, but President Obama, candidate Obama, in an amazing way, was able to put together the new Democratic coalition. It's the expanded version of FDR's Democratic coalition, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's not just the workers, the African-American people, and the urban population that he put together, Roosevelt put together. Now President Obama and his remarkable talent, and I certainly don't agree with every single thing he does because I do believe we should stop TPP, but the president's done a lot of good things, and in this case, it was magnificent how he's built this larger coalition of young people, lower income people, people of color, women, and this Democratic coalition, and I would like to think of it, it's a progressive Democratic coalition. And we need to push our politicians to go in that direction. But he put that together and expanded it.
Right.
That's why they couldn't beat Mitt Romney. I mean, that's why they could beat Mitt Romney, I should say. Would you agree with that, sir? I may have missed something.
I agree with you because I actually felt that we've become so diverse that you can't buy us anymore.
That's right.
And my other question about money is why are the Koch brothers, as old and evil as they are, still trying to control this country?
Greed.
I mean, they're half dead.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about that, but you can check with their doctors. But here, I think this is a great question because it gets to the heart of What is that drives these extremely greedy corporate leaders around the world? They've got so many billions, and they're not satisfied with enough millions, which gives them a great lifestyle. I think it's an addiction, and it's some degeneration of humanity, of the human side of those people. I think they better get back in touch with their humanity. It's the same thing. What does it profit a man if he should gain the whole world, but lose his own soul? This is it.
Right.
You know, to me, that's what it's about. That it comes down to our humanity, who we are as people, why we're in this earth. Why we're in this earth. What are we on this earth for? Just to go out and buy a few more Lear jets and have 5 more yachts instead, Mr. Cokes?
Right.
You know, what's it all about? So that's what we have to talk to these people. But more than that, we've got to demand from them, as Frederick Douglass said, change.
I also have a statement for rich people. No matter how much money you have, when you die, you're going to hell or heaven broke. So,
Either way you go broke, you're going to go broke, right.
and one final question,
Yeah.
politically. Why do you think Donald Trump, because I actually believe he's going to be the Republican Party nominee, because he has the money, and he knows how to play to the crazies.
He's doing a good job of that.
He's doing well.
Because I think on the right wing, on the side of the spectrum, the Republican side, and the Tea Party wing is so powerful in the primaries because they're so active, these right-wing Republicans, that even the so-called moderate Republicans have lost the control of it, and Trump knows how to push people's buttons. He's got the money, and there's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. A lot of people think, this guy's got the money, he won't be bought by the corporations. Are you kidding me? He is the corporation. And yet people are so naive, so my book points that out. A billionaire can't save us. He wouldn't even have the incentive to. He might say what he wants to get elected, but the point is this man is part of the problem, right? Gambling casinos and big corporations not caring about workers and then slamming immigrants. People that come to this country for a better life for no fault of their own. We know for a fact it was NAFTA, it was GATT and WTO that caused this decrepit downturn in the Mexican economy across the border and many other global south countries, Guatemala. These folks, because of NAFTA and free trade, were destroyed over there, the middle class. And the U.S. government, you know, subsidizes big farmers here, right? So big corporate farmers dumped their corn on Mexico with free trade and drove out the Mexican family farmer. And where should he or she go to make a living? They go to some factory in the maquiladoras, which are just as bad as anything else across the border, which pay next to nothing, the maquiladoras. And they go to work there, and they can't make a living there, so where do some of them come? They are daring people to risk their lives to save their families, and we should be actually honoring them in so many ways, and certainly welcoming them and saying, we want to fix this, because I know they're not coming here for the food. The food is great in America. I love California food and cuisine. They're not coming here, because Mexican food is just as good. I've been to Mexico 5 times, all over the place there. I've driven my car through there, I took a plane one time, but anyway, what I'm saying is they're not coming here for the beaches, they're coming here to make a better life. Right. And it's because our corporate elites, along with Salinas, the corporate president of Mexico back in the 80s, along with the Canadian Prime Minister, pushed through a free trade agreement which had nothing, no labor safeguards, no raising of environmental standards, and that was the crime. And that's why they're coming here, and we should welcome them and give them a path to legalization.
And I have one final question.
Yes.
Why do you think the new adopted child of the Koch brothers, Rubio, why do you think they adopted him?
These are great questions coming from a political scientist. They're adopted Rubio because he seems to be the guy, well, first of all, he's Latino, so he's an ethnic minority, and they know they can't compete against progressives unless they have some kind of a smoke and mirrors game. Right. It's a color game. So bring this Latino guy in as a senator, son of immigrants, came from modest background, and they can trump him. They can put him up there as a replacement for Trump, but being that he's a better guy, because people think Trump is a joke, and he might lose. Trump will lose the general election to either Hillary or Bernie. There's no doubt about that in my view. But I believe that Rubio will be put up there as this American success story. Rags to riches family, left communism and came to this great country of freedom. And then Rubio is bilingual, obviously. And they're going for the Latino vote, aren't they? They've been desperate to get the Latino voters back, which they've lost, mostly, since Prop 187 in California. So they're putting him up there for that reason. And these guys are not stupid. They're just selfish and greedy.
I agree with you. It's not going to work, but I just wanted to hear
That's a great question.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Peter, do you mind if I elaborate a little bit?
Not at all. Please do. Come on up.
I'm Jan Ryan with Move to Amend, and by the way, we are a nonprofit, which means we are nonpartisan. So we cannot talk about candidates or support one candidate over another. But I did want to point out that how it is that all these things that we want cannot be done because of corporate constitutional rights. For example, Peter talked about GMO labeling. Now, as misinterpreted, as absurdly interpreted by the Supreme Court, now they say that corporations have a constitutional amendment, the same rights as us under the First Amendment. So even if Congress passed a bill, which would be a flaming miracle, saying that requiring that GMOs be labeled, the corporations could go to the Supreme Court or any federal court, and they could say, excuse me, this violates our First Amendment rights. And the Supreme Court has found, under the First Amendment, that there is a constitutional right not to be forced to speak. So according to that, we could not currently pass a law and have it stick because the Supreme Court would overturn it because of corporate constitutional rights under the First Amendment. Another example, and I'll try to be brief, fracking. There was a county down in Arizona that passed an ordinance that banned fracking in their county. The petroleum industry went to court, sued the county, and this was a democratically elected ordinance that presumably all the constituents wanted to protect them from the ill effects of fracking, the lousy air, the ruinage of the landscape, and so on and so forth. Earthquakes, who knows? But anyway, the petroleum industry went to court, filed in federal district court, and said, wait a minute, we are people, we have rights under the Fifth Amendment, which has a takings clause. And the takings clause says that if you take property, if a governmental entity takes property, it has to compensate that property owner with just compensation, which in this case would mean that they would have to pay back all the profits the petroleum company would have paid had they been allowed to frack. Yeah. Now, what happened in that case is that the district court and the Supreme Court, if they went all the way up to the Supreme Court, they would say the same damn thing. This ordinance, this federal district court, invalidated it. And so the people of Mora County have no control. So what I'm telling you is that corporations have more constitutional rights than we do. Mm-hmm. They have all the rights now. And I also wanted to mention that Move to Amend is part of a nationwide organization. We have affiliates all over the country. We probably have 10 affiliates right here in California. And we have about 400 to 600,000 members. So we're not just, trying to do this by ourselves here. We're doing this, as a huge nationwide movement, and I really hope you'll all join with the Grange in helping us to get rid of this corporate tyranny. Sorry.
Excellent. No, quite all right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Jan, I just wanted to mention, Jan, you mentioned Vermont. The state of Vermont was one of 3 states that passed a bill on mandatory labeling. Connecticut and Maine also passed one, but they have trigger clauses. That means there has to be something that happens first before it takes an effect. And in those cases, there have to be contiguous states that also enact a similar bill. But in Vermont, it did not have a trigger. It went into effect, but it was challenged in court by the corporations. But in my understanding, it didn't Vermont won, and
Right.
it's going to be
Monsanto
take
challenged
effect.
that. Monsanto lost the case in the lower
Right.
court. They're going to
Yes.
appeal it to the
So
Supreme
the
Court.
only thing that would wipe it out is if the Dark Act in Congress passed, because that would preempt states from requiring a mandated label on genetically engineered foods. And so that's why, we don't want the Dark Act to pass, because it's a preemption of local and state control.
Right. And I'm afraid if it went to the Supreme Court, they would overturn it.
Yes, yes, let's go to your question, sir. I'd like to say a few more things here. Just go ahead, please.
Now that we identified the causes to all of this, the corporation control and all of this, and the culprit to freedom of speech and the rest of it, what are the things that we can do, not only this group, but the entire nation, in your opinion, what are the ways that to get rid of this system that's perpetuated not only through Congress, but also state legislature, and even the higher courts?
Yes.
What are and especially the fact that, call me a pessimist, but I feel like it's hard to change the system considering what's going on nowadays with the NSA, with the National Security Administration, that they can, with all the information, they can nip anything in the bud, any movement, regardless of whether it's peaceful or not. So in your opinion, what are the things that can be done?
Well, in my last chapter, I offer 3 solutions, actually. The first solution is for us, we the people, to demand from our candidates for office, especially federal office and state office, that they give up their corporate money. I have a list in my book at the end pages of 535 members of Congress, the Senate and the House, with their direct phone numbers into Washington, D.C., and there's a live person that answers those. Get his name or her name and say, I want to talk to this member of Congress, and there are 10,000 more of my fellow voters in my district, and here's my district number. I identify their number, the district numbers of these Congress members. You call them and demand several things. First is give up your corporate money and then offer to help them get elected through grassroots support and through small donations of yours and ours. Organize 10,000 people in your district to do that. And when they get phone calls, these members of Congress do pay attention. They have to, because they don't get elected directly by the money. They get elected directly by the votes, right? So first thing is to demand it. Second is I've got a 13-point demands plan here that could be at the same time told to them, here's what we demand of you if you want to stay in office, and we've got your number. And we live in your district. We're your neighbors, sir. First demand point. Give up campaign money from corporate lobbyists and win without it, as Professor Paul Wellstone did in his grassroots campaign and became U.S. Senator from Minnesota. Second, run as clean money candidates. I'm going to talk about that as my second solution. The state of Maine pioneered clean money elections. Even Arizona picked it up, and a few other states are using it partially. The third, rely on volunteers and small donations from individuals. Fourth, close unnecessary corporate tax loopholes to bring in money to invest in America and pay down the national debt. Fifth, create high-paying jobs and stop outsourcing them. You tell the congressman that. We're demanding. We pay your salary, sir. Ma'am, we pay your salary. You don't pay us. The next, bring back quality tuition-free education, as in all other advanced countries and as in California had from 1960 to 1980. We know that California had that. Some of you went to UC Berkeley and the State University. I started teaching in San Francisco in 1976 at City College, and my students paid $6 service fee, entrance fee, for no tuition, with no tuition, for 15 units. You know that. Some of you, Cal State? That was a service fee. It wasn't even a tuition, because the master plan for higher education called for tuition-free education. It got decimated after a while. But you're right. UC Berkeley, our former governor Pete Wilson, sir, paid $37 to go to UC Berkeley Law School. That's it, for all 15 units for 3 years. And Governor Schwarzenegger paid $6 for all 15 units at Santa Monica College, and he got a 2-year degree there and transferred and got a bachelor's. So these are the guys that are taking it away from us now, and you demand it back.
They should take his degree.
There you go, take it back. But Germany, you know Germany and other European countries are all tuition free now, all the way through medical school, right? In fact, Germany even has a program where an international student who speaks English can come there, and as long as they qualify, can get tuition free education, bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees. In Germany, they're educating the world for tuition free. And here's another demand right here. Stop big corporations from destroying our air, water, and soil, and switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy. We know that rooftop solar and wind power, other kinds of power, can work. It's worked in Germany. 50% of German electricity comes from renewable energy, and they've done it because they have what's called we used to be called a feed-in tariff. It's called now a solar payment policy of 99 cents per kilowatt hour. If you put rooftop solar in Germany, starting out at the beginning, you get 99 cents paid to you for all the excess energy you don't use. You put it back in the grid and they pay you 99 cents per kilowatt hour, which allows you to get couple $1,000s a month, which you can pay off your home with. We could have that right here. The state of Maine became the first American state to do it recently, but it's just 33 cents rather than 99 cents. But it's the beginning. So you demand that. Here's another one. I'm almost done with this. Stop big corporations from endangering our lives with harmful chemicals, pesticides, and genetically modified GMO foods, and require labeling of GMOs. You tell those members of Congress they better do it or we're throwing them out next election. Break up the big banks and re-regulate them to prevent another great recession by restoring the GlassSteagall Act. Of course, you heard many candidates say they're going to do it now, right? Except for one or two. Implement a financial transaction tax on Wall Street to make it pay for destroying the American economy and to help rebuild the middle class. Next one, end waste, fraud, and abuse in the military spending by auditing the Pentagon, the only government department not audited. How many of you knew? The Pentagon, the largest, most expensive government department, does not have an audit system. They have no uniform computer or accounting system. They've rigged up old computers with COBOL language to keep track of their weapons and their spending, and it's way off. There are so many billions lost every year and stolen in the Pentagon because there's no tracking of that. There was a young man named Sean Aiken, who I documented in the book. I got his story. Sean Aiken was a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had shattered his hip. He had PTSD. He had mental health problems. He was trying to recover, right, in treatment. He has a wife and 2 children. And they were living in an apartment, and they had to pay their rent regularly. Sean's salary was $3,300 a month. October 2011, his paycheck went from $3,300 a month down to $2,000 a month, just like that, dived. He was flat. He couldn't believe what's going on. So he went to the higher-ups and said, what's going on here? They said, we'll look into it. Don't worry. Next month, it goes down again. By December, Christmas time, 2011, his paycheck was $117 with no explanation from the Pentagon. This man was desperate. He had to go to food kitchens to get food for his family. He had to get toy giveaways, 1 toy per child. That's it. That was it. At the Salvation Army, wherever he went. And he had to borrow money to pay his rent. This is a veteran, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, Reuters wrote about the story. They put it out there. And when it got out there, guess what? The Pentagon investigated, and they said, you know what? We thought that we had overpaid him. That's why we were taking the money back. We thought we had overpaid him. Then they found that they had never overpaid him. They made a mistake because they don't have a good accounting system, and they gave him all the money back after that horrendous experience that this man had to face, veteran of ours had to face. This is outrageous when you're spending $367 million per F-35 Joint Strike Fighter Navy version. $367 million. By the way, our Congress just voted for $1 billion this year to buy several F-35s, which don't even perform properly. Those planes lose to China in a simulated war. So let me just finish. I'm almost done here, promise. I talk way too much, don't I? Hang on. Okay, one sec. Okay, I'm here. Create small business opportunity by providing low-interest loans and lowering their taxes. How about that? If you're going to increase the minimum wage, which we should do, to $15 an hour, let's lower the tax on small business or give them government subsidies instead of subsidizing ExxonMobil and Chevron and everyone else. And the last but not least is the 13th demand I would recommend that the reader should put toward these Congress members. Sponsor the We the People 28th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that states that corporations are not persons with natural rights and that money is not equal to speech and can be strictly regulated. This will get big money out of politics, prevent corporations from buying our government, and return our government to the American people. That's the last one. If your senators and congressmen are not responsive, let them know that you are organizing thousands of neighbors, of voters in your area, to vote them out and support non-corporate bought candidates in the next election. Above all, share the information in this book with your friends and neighbors. This is how peaceful revolutions begin. And that's exactly what we need. That's the first solution. Tell them to run as a Wellstone with no money from the corporate lobbyists. Second, bring in clean money elections at the state and federal level. Right now, only 2 states have it comprehensively. And the way that works is in Maine, if you want to run as a clean money candidate, all you have to do is say, I'm going to raise $5 from 65 people, voters in my district. That's my nominating fee. I turn the $300 over to the Maine Election Commission. Automatically, the Maine Election Commission puts you on the ballot and creates and calls you a clean money candidate. You can use the label. And the Election Commission, the government of Maine, writes you a check for several $1,000s of public money to run your campaign, but you have to agree not to accept any private money, not even your own private money, not to spend it on the election, so you can be bought by the people, not the corporate lobbyists. When Maine brought that in 1998, they passed that law. By the year 2000, they tried it for the first time, and guess what? 80% of the Maine legislature was clean money elected. Today it's 70%. They're still doing good things in Maine. It became the first state to bring in a feed-in tariff. It also became the first state back in 2000 to implement a comprehensive health care system because they weren't bought by the lobbyists. So it works in Maine. It worked in Arizona to some extent. In Arizona, though, even some of those right-wing Tea Party Republicans got elected without the money. They still got elected because of clean money. So you still got to change the mentality of people. Clean money won't solve everything. That's the second solution. The third and the most comprehensive solution, which I'm working with 100%, is the move to amend the We the People 28th Amendment. That has to be passed. And I'm here at your service. You want me to go out and speak for the 28th Amendment? Let me know where and when. I'll be right there. Just give me a ticket to come up here. Have to drive up here, you know. Because I'm teaching full-time also right now. And I would say one of the things we could start doing is, and I want to describe this in one of the chapters of my book, is let me read this little section on politics, what's happened. And Aristotle was the ancient Greeks said politics has to do with the community, the polis, right? Being involved in the community, the affairs of the community. I say politics has been reduced in America today to the science and mechanics of winning elections. The heart, soul, and mind have been taken out of it. The expert advisors tell the candidate what to say when speaking, what message should go in the brochures, how it should be presented, what should be in the candidate's 30-second TV commercials, even what to say and not to say in public debates. All these experts, advisors tell him or her this, right? That's how they've been running it in the public. When he is elected, this rubber stamp politician owes not only his donors access, favors, and votes, but also the campaign experts who helped put him in office. The basic formula has been win the election so you can have power. Use your power to do some minimal good as you see it, but don't say anything or do anything that may alienate your mostly wealthy corporate donors, even if it might promote the common good. So what kind of politics have we come to today? We've taken the heart, mind, and soul and the truth out of it, and instead it's all about winning. I experienced that because I ran for Congress without corporate money. I was outspent 5-1 and still got 45% to 52 doing grassroots campaigning, speaking in churches and college classes, community organizations, having a lot of volunteers. But I couldn't overcome at the end because the other guy slammed the mailboxes with 10 mailings in the last 2 weeks, including 5 of them were lies about me. So we couldn't recover from that. But the point I'm trying to make here is we've got to get our candidates, including the ones who are in office, to start talking and speaking the truth of what they believe, not what the polls tell them, not the nuances of focus group results, as unfortunately some of our Democrats are doing. And I'm not endorsing Bernie Sanders here. I'm just telling you, there's a prototype of someone who's got a record of starting at grassroots, running without corporate money, without developer money, as mayor of Burlington, and he did in fact lose 6 times before he won by 10 votes through volunteers. From then on, he's got a record. He campaigned on the promise when he ran for mayor that he would take the privately run utilities, which was charging them too much. They were charging the consumer way too much. He said, I'm going to take this private utility, I'm going to use the taxpayer money in the government and buy it and make it nonprofit and lower your fees, your rates. And he did it. And from then on, it was up. Congress next and Senate. So I'm not endorsing Bernie Sanders. I'm just saying when there are examples of someone that's got high visibility, is doing what ought to be done at every single level, we need to use that as an example and urge every one of our candidates, including our city council candidates, to do the same thing. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. And that'll bring a lot more voters back, because now they can believe in the politician and the leader, not just know they're saying a few things to get elected. I've been on the media. I've been a political analyst for KEIB, which was owned by Clear Channel, the same station Rush Limbaugh was on. I was on Saturday. I had half an hour to come in with progressive views because we had an audience. I have hosted KPFK, Pacifica Radio, several times. So that's already automatic because they're progressive, right? And they're smaller audience. So how do we get the mainstream media to be able to affect this change? I would argue that there's an opening now in some of the mainstream media as long as we have an audience for this message. And we have to somehow get it in there here and there with people that are interviewed. And I have to get on there, you have to get on there as much as possible. Call in, do the call-in shows when you get a chance to talk shows, even right-wing talk shows. Call in and give this progressive ideas. Talk about our food, how important that is, how these corporations are killing our children with the foods that they shouldn't be eating. And the right wing will care about that. These Tea Partiers care about their kids too, most of them, I think. So you know, we have to get in there and use any way to get into the media. Other than that, though, I will give some encouraging news. Social media is incredible. It's just taking off with the young people. It is so powerful. If you go on there, and you will see just hundreds of thousands of posts, and they're becoming political posts now, meaning in the best sense of the word, the Greek sense of being involved with affairs by and for the community. These are young people saying, we demand, we want to have tuition-free education. We knew we had it in California. We heard about that in our class. They're saying these things. Mr. Whoever's running for Congress or president, you better give that to us. They're very concerned about the environment, young people are. When I speak about GMOs in my classes, my U.S. government classes and sociology classes, all their ears perk up. And they want to know, what is this GMO? How bad is it? Where's the science behind this? And so they get educated because they're using my book as one of the 2 textbooks, partly as well, as other research that we have. So I have a lot of faith in young people to have social media. We can go around the corporate media to some extent with the social media. Ultimately, it has to be word of mouth. It has to be word of mouth. Speaking in the grocery store line to people about these things, in the coffee shops, in restaurants. That's the best way and only way to do it. And I am optimistic that, as Dr. King said, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. I'd like to paraphrase that by saying, the arc of history is long, and we must bend it toward justice.
Exactly.
We must bend it toward justice. God's work on this earth must truly be our own. You know that. And I think this book really is going to be a guide to action, if people would get it. Dr. Michael Parenti, a political scientist from Yale, said, Peter Mathews provides us with stories of his personal activism along with a cogent political analysis of what is happening to our country and our world. With clarity and courage, he fights against dollar democracy on behalf of real democracy. Then he says, this is the clincher, well written and well informed, this book is a citizen's weapon. Don't you love that? A citizen's weapon, a nonviolent weapon. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Thank you.